And joining us now is Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and columnist for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, Tony Messenger. Messenger's columns on what have in practice become debtors' prisons in Missouri expose the harsh reality of low-income Americans who commit misdemeanor crimes and then become entrapped in a cycle of being indebted to the criminal justice system in that state. Tony's book, Profit and Punishment: How America Criminalizes the Poor in the Name of Justice, looks at the harsh practices of fines and penalties that can land the poor in jail. Tony, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me, Lindsay.
So in your book, you detail how the Ferguson protests weren't just about the death of Michael Brown, but also about highlighting the issue of oppressive fines and fees in traffic stop cases. How did the Ferguson protests help, in your estimation, bring attention to these practices of municipal courts in Missouri?
I think it raised an issue nationally that a lot of people, myself included, were not really aware of. That a lot of poor black people, in the case of North St. Louis County, were arrested regularly on minor offenses, most of them traffic related, ended up owing money for those offenses, sometimes got arrested again if they missed a court hearing, and ended up in jail primarily because they couldn't afford to pay the fines and fees. What I found out in the process of researching my book is that this is a problem all across the country, and it affects poor white people in rural Missouri and Oklahoma and Minnesota and lots of places where it's primarily poor white people, and it affects poor black people in the cities and in North St. Louis County and in Columbia, South Carolina, where one of the characters of my book, Sasha Darby, lives. It is a massive problem all across the country, and it's basically the criminalization of poverty.
And in what ways do sectors within the criminal justice system benefit from funds generated by municipal courts? How does it help balance municipality budgets?
Well, frankly, I don't think it does very much. There has actually been a study in New Mexico that indicates that it costs more for cities and counties to try to collect the revenue that they're seeking than they actually bring in. And the reason for that makes a lot of sense. 80% of the folks who participate in the municipal and county courts happen to be poor. We know that because they qualify for a public defender. And so the cities and counties that are trying to use these schemes, trying to use these fines and fees to balance their budget, are basically charging a backdoor tax to poor people. And when they can't afford to pay them, they end up putting them back in jail.
Can you explain how the so-called pay-to-stay bills operate, and what happens to taxpayer money if detainees have to pay for their bonds themselves?
Yeah, what happens in a lot of states, and this is what I originally wrote a lot of my columns in Missouri about, is that there is actually a statute in every state in the country. New Hampshire recently repealed theirs, but every other state has a statute that allows cities and counties to charge people for jail time. As your viewers can see, I'm sitting here in a hotel in Springfield, Missouri, and I'm going to get a bill for my time in the hotel. Well, jails are doing the same thing, and it's primarily poor people who have to pay, because wealthy people don't spend time in jail on misdemeanors because they can afford their cash bail to get out. And these bills end up costing thousands and thousands of dollars. One of the main people in my book is a woman named Brooke Bergen. She stole an $8 tube of mascara from Walmart in central Missouri. She ended up getting a bill for $15,000 for her time in jail. And the judge used her inability to pay that bill as a threat to put her back in jail over and over again.
And your book also follows the narratives of 3 single women. Why was it so important for you to delve into the female perspective when discussing this aspect of the criminal justice system?
When I first started looking into these cases in Missouri, it just so happens that many of the victims of this scheme were young women, and they were single mothers. And it struck me how incredibly damaging to their lives this criminalization of their poverty was. When a poor, young, single mother gets put in jail because they can't afford to pay their fines and fees, they lose their car, they lose their apartment, they lose their minimum wage job, and often their kids end up in social services or foster care. The incredible harm to these women who cause absolutely no damage to society, who are not a threat to public safety, but are being used as pawns in a scheme to try to raise money for cities and counties. I just thought that was the most compelling story. And it's important to me that as people read this book, they connect to the victims of this scheme. It's important for them to see that this could be their sister, their aunt, their daughter, their mother, who's being abused by the tyranny of government.
And there's been some bipartisan agreement in Missouri that this system, where unpaid fees and penalties can lead to revoked bail and imprisonment, that it's unfair and may even be unconstitutional. So why is it still happening, especially if statistics show that these court fees and the harsh collection tactics don't deter crime, may actually increase crime?
Well, you're right. And one of the things that attracts me to this story is that on the left, you have the ACLU, and on the right, you have the Koch brothers and lots of people in between who understand the idea that using the criminal justice system as a form of wealth extraction is unconstitutional and is a constant violation of civil rights of poor people. The reason it's so hard to undo these schemes is because they are so ingrained in the system. It starts with cash bail. Then you have the underfunded public defender systems. Then you have state legislatures in states where you have lawmakers who won't raise taxes that turn to the courts for fines and fees to raise money for various services. Once you start raising money for those services through the courts, if you try to stop that process, then you're going to have all sorts of constituencies wondering where they're going to get their money from. So it's a very difficult scheme to unravel, but we can start with some simple things. And the most important one is judges defending and protecting the civil rights of the defendants who come before them and not forcing them back into jail because they can't afford to pay the fines and fees that the system is trying to impose upon them.
Tony Messenger, really interesting stuff that you don't hear often people talking about. We thank you so much for your time and insight. Your book, of course, Profit and Punishment, is now available wherever books are sold.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.